welcome to the College Chaps podcast. On this episode, we're going to talk with our guest about another exciting weekend of SEC football. But first, we are the Chaps, and I'm joined by the greatest college football mind this side of the Smoky Mountains. Oliver, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing very well, George. Thank you. These introductions just get better and better. I cannot wait and see what you have for the end of the season. You have to conjure up like some Charles Dickens level introduction for me. It's amazing. I love it.
I was struggling today, but anyway, it doesn't matter. But the most important person on this podcast is our guest, who you will know and recognise from the SEC Network and SiriusXM if you get access to it. And you'll remember her chasing down Diego Pavia in Nashville last season after the Commodores had defeated the Crimson Tide. And she also had some marriage tips from Mike Leach. We followed her with great interest as she and her husband traversed most of Europe on their pre-season honeymoon. So we're thrilled to be joined by Alyssa Lang. Alyssa, hi, how are you?
Thank you guys for having me. It was quite the introduction, so I really appreciate that, and I'm excited to hang out with you guys today.
Sometimes we use like most of the time just doing the introduction, so we don't have so much time left to talk to you. Anyway, I we wanted to have you on this podcast for ages, but it's timely, I think, because a couple of weeks ago I was in Tuscaloosa and I had a newfound respect for the job that you do because I was down on the field with 5 minutes to go and waiting to get onto the field. And when the final whistle went, there was like a stampede of people to get to the centre circle. And I'm not going to try and hide my inept pace, but I was like miles behind everybody else. And I thought, well, when we get you on, let's start with that because I wasn't being disingenuous. A lot of people will know you from that incredible clip with Diego Pavia. Before we get on to that, firstly, just how quick do you have to be to get into the centre circle to get that interview? You must be super quick.
Yeah, I joke that I ran track and field in high school, and I joke that, that was one of the best things I could have ever done for my career was being a sprinter on my high school track team. You have to be quick for sure, especially when it's a high stakes game and there's a lot going on. If you've just called a blowout, it may be a little bit slower getting out to midfield, the celebration's a little bit more toned down, but for a good game, you are really locking eyes on where the coach is going to be, where you think they're going to intercept each other for the handshake, and where you can sort of close in on that angle to be able to get them right after the handshake. So the worst is when you get kind of stuck in the crowd and you lose them. And for someone like me, who's only about 5'5", it's not easy to see over these big bodies who are out there. So sometimes you're up on your tippy toes if if you don't get to them fast enough. But I've never lost anyone, which is I think at this point, knock on wood, it'll happen to me this weekend. Now I'll lose someone, but you do have to have a little bit of speed, and I think that's something that if you're at a game and you want some entertainment post game, watch the sideline reporter sprinting to go get that interview because 9 times out of 10, we are running to try to make that happen and then making it seem like we weren't running, 10 seconds later when you're on TV.
I think that's what shocked me the most because you seem so calm and demure when you're giving the interview. And I'm thinking, you've just run 50 yards in like 3 seconds. we have seen a lot of kind of what we would, in this side of we would call pitch invasions, but you would call kind of field, people getting onto the field. And
Yeah.
a couple of weeks ago at Virginia, that looked really scary. And, I think the first thing I did was get to Twitter to see if Chris Budden was okay. But we'll talk about Diego Pavia, but what's it like when the fans get on? It must be absolute chaos. And how on earth do you manage to lock in on your assignment effectively?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would affectionately say I kind of black out during those moments. Not that I don't know what's going on, but you sort of put your blinders on and you have to be really focused because there is an element of it being scary. And I have been on the football field for my fair share of field stormings. I've also been on the basketball court when that happens as well several times. And that's an even smaller area with students and fans who are even closer to the playing surface. So I would almost venture to say that sometimes basketball can be even more chaotic of a situation. Football, just the sheer volume, certainly can be overwhelming. The game that comes to mind when you ask that question is that Vanderbilt Alabama game from last year. And I knew that I was going to have to try to get two interviews. I knew I was going to have to try to get Diego Pavia and Clark Lee, that we needed to hear from both of those guys. And I knew that I would have a better shot at trying to find Coach Lee second, because I knew Diego Pavia fairly well at that point, and I knew he might run out of the stadium at this point. You've just beaten number one Alabama. If you don't get him pretty immediately, you might lose him completely. So to your question about locking on your target, I actually was standing inside the team box, which is, you're not supposed to be there as the reporter. If you are, inside the dotted lines, you're going to get in trouble. But I kind of made an exception knowing that, okay, I cannot let Diego out of my sight as the clock winds down. I've got to be able to see exactly where he's going. And then to your point earlier, it kind of resulted in a chase that everybody saw me literally chasing him across the field because he wasn't going to stop. But it happens occasionally. Years ago, I did Kansas State at Missouri, and Missouri hit a 62-yard field goal to win the game, and they stormed the field. And of course, we go get Eli Drinkwitz immediately in the aftermath, but then I'm looking for Harrison Mevis, the kicker, who just hit the 62-yard field goal. And at this point, students, fans, players, everybody's on the field. And I started asking fans, have you seen Harrison Mevis? Like, I've already done the interview with Coach. And there was actually a group of Missouri students, I believe, who were like, "Oh yeah, we just saw him. He's way over there." So I start running, and then another group of fans said, "Are you looking for Harrison?" I said, "Yeah, he's right over there," and they were helping me get to him. That has never happened to me before. That remains the only time that has ever happened. So I think it varies by occasion, but locking in on that target is certainly important.
When you look back at the Pavia thing, and when you were watching it, because I was watching it live, and they had an amazing kind of aerial shot of you, because so they could see that it wasn't like necessarily the cameraman behind it was with you. So you were able to see just how difficult it was. Looking back at that instant, and that one moment doesn't define a reporter or a journalist, right? And I'm not trying to make it that way, but looking back at that, what do you think now about just the craziness of that day? How I've got to know Chris Childers actually is he was on the podcast, and he lives in Nashville, and he was talking about the day that the goalpost went past his window, right? That for Nashville, that was, and for Vanderbilt fans, that was a huge day in the history. How do you look back on that day, Alyssa?
Yeah, one of the questions I think I get asked the most is, what is the best game you've ever covered? And for me now, that is my answer. And there's a lot of different layers to that. Obviously, everything that you just hit on as far as it being so important for Nashville and so important for Vanderbilt. I got to the SEC network in 2018, and I had a lot of Vanderbilt games in my early years. I saw Georgia up 30 plus on Vanderbilt after one quarter, many, many years in a row. Then Clark Lee comes in, and if you've ever sat and had a conversation with Clark Lee, you could talk to him for hours about anything, not just football, but about life, about any topic that comes to mind. So watching him truly and being there in the building for so many games of the bad and those tough early seasons, it was so rewarding for someone like me who has nothing to do with the program, who's not there every day, but has been able to watch from this national bird's eye view, but also from a more micro being within the SEC and the SEC network and being a little bit closer to it. It's just was a very cool feeling to watch it come to fruition for a group of people who you knew had worked so hard for this moment to get there. And obviously, where we sit right now, October 6th, with Vanderbilt having just lost on the road in Tuscaloosa, and that being the college game day game. Like, a lot of people like to hate on Vanderbilt now because they've got this trash talking quarterback, and here they come and they think they're somebody. But is that not why we love college football and why we love sports? Just this underdog program that everybody counted out for eternity that now is chirping a little bit because they've had success. It is hard for me to genuinely sit there and understand anybody who could hate on this process and this program. Even when you really circle in on Diego Pavia and who he is, if he were your quarterback, you'd love it. Who doesn't want their quarterback to walk in believing that they're going to beat the crap out of you every single Saturday? So that moment for me was cool for that reason. It was the proof in the pudding of the work that had been put in behind the scenes in a day and age where we can see microwave success and you can see that work. This was not microwaved in Nashville. This was crock pot, baked slow, simmered, however you want to say it. And for that to work doesn't get more blue collar respect the process than that. And that's probably the reason that I look back on that game and say, wow, like that's why we do this. And that's what college football is all about.
Two things. A food metaphor on this podcast will always go a long way.
I'm a foodie, so always.
As Willa mentioned of the thicker kicker, Harrison Mevis, that will always
he was the best.
I love Harrison. Alyssa, let's move on to South Carolina. You're an alma mater of the Gamecocks. A lot expected from the program this year from, I think, all quarters, really. Even over this side of the pond, there was a sense there was something special brewing for South Carolina this year, and it hasn't really delivered, excuse me, anywhere near expectations. Talk to us a little bit about what's happening with the Gamecocks, with Lenoris Sellers, with everything so far up to this point.
Yeah, it's certainly been an interesting season. I think starting the year off with this emotional matchup against Virginia Tech that focused so much on the Beamer family, and for South Carolina to get out of Atlanta, that neutral site game with a win, I think all of us Gamecock alums sat here and went, okay, here we go. That it's going to happen. Everything we've been talking about in the offseason is going to happen. Virginia Tech, we've since learned, is not a very good football team. They've already moved on from their head coach as of a couple of weeks ago. So maybe a little bit of overexcitement from some of those early performances. South Carolina lost a lot. And I think we sat here and we said, okay, well, they dipped into the transfer portal. Obviously, they've had great recruiting classes over the last few years of Shane Beamer. But at the end of the day, it's really hard to replace that sort of NFL talent. You're talking about both sides of the football, specifically for South Carolina on the defensive side of the football. That being said, I think a lot of the uncomfortability with this team right now is coming from the offensive side of the football, right? It's not necessarily been the defense letting opponents blow them out. It's been the offense not being able to keep up from a scoring perspective. So for me, it's frustrating because you see Lenoris Sellers and how great he is, what the potential of him at the quarterback position could be. He's going to be a top draft pick, but you look at an inability to consistently protect from the offensive line. You look at some of the skill positions, not understanding where they're supposed to be from a blocking standpoint. And Lenoris is always going to shoulder more of the blame than he should. But when you go back and watch some of those games, the 10 players around Lenoris Sellers weren't necessarily putting him in the best position to be able to go be Superman and win football games. And I think that is how I would describe South Carolina. And that's sort of my fear for them right now is they're going to need Lenoris to be Superman as of where we stand right now in every single game. And to be able to go on the road in Baton Rouge this weekend and ask Lenoris to do that is a tall ask. So it's a team that's coming off of a bye. We'll see what they look like now in the month of October. There's something magical about South Carolina. We affectionately call it Cocktober in Columbia, South Carolina. So there's some sort of magic in this month. Maybe we see it kind of come to fruition, but there's nobody outside of the quarterback on that offense that scares me. And I think that that's South Carolina's biggest problem. It should be Nick Harbor, but it's not there consistently.
And that's kind of a tale of the tape as we go into this LSU game, right? This is two teams who had got offenses and quarterbacks that were highly heralded coming into the season, and it hasn't quite gelled for all of those reasons that you've just said for both teams in some respects. But obviously, there's additional things at play for LSU as well. It's kind of a crunch game, right, for both programs in terms of the direction of the rest of the season.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. Like, I hadn't really thought about it until you just said that, but it's sort of like looking in a mirror for both of these programs with some of the things that have gone wrong for them through the first 6 weeks. Yeah, I mean, LSU storied spent a lot of money on this roster in 2025. This is supposed to be a college football playoff team. Certainly when you started the year with a win against Clemson, now to the same, idea of Virginia Tech not necessarily being a good barometer for South Carolina. Clemson, perhaps not a great barometer for LSU either, right? But this is a team that has more talent than South Carolina. For some reason, it just hasn't come to fruition in the way that we thought that it would, certainly against a team like Ole Miss that had a brand new starting quarterback who wasn't even the starting quarterback when we began the year. And for me in LSU, I think, guys, the most confounding part of this team is the quarterback position and Garrett Nussmeier, where Lenora Sellers is the clear strength for South Carolina. I have more question marks now around Garrett Nussmeier than I did when we started the season. Health is certainly a topic that we have discussed. Brian Kelly and Garrett Nussmeier have said either he's fine or I'm not talking about it. So we only have that to go on. But for me, when I watch some of these games, certainly against SEC opponents, it's the decision making that is questionable for me. Throwing into double, triple coverage, throwing balls behind receivers that have wide open walk-in touchdowns on the road against Ole Miss. That was the area of his game that we were all told was supposed to take this big step forward this year. So a lot of similar issues between these two, but I'm looking at a quarterback who I had potentially as the best quarterback returning in the SEC who has not played like it out there in Baton Rouge. Maybe he can have a get-right game against South Carolina's defense. We will see. But we certainly have not seen LSU's offense stepping in the right direction over the past couple of weeks.
Interesting though. There's a number of quarterbacks, and we do tend to focus on the quarterbacks, right? Somewhat unfairly, but that's the nature of the game. But look at what's happening at Texas. We don't like to talk about Penn State on this podcast, but Penn State, for example, a lot of things are just not going well with the quarterbacks that we thought were going to step up this year, as you say, take that next step and prepare themselves. Certainly for the case of Nussmeier, prepare himself onto the NFL, and it's just not worked.
Yeah.
A program where the quarterback situation has worked out is at Ole Miss. Not for the reasons we thought it was going to be, but Ole Miss took on LSU at the weekend and beat them. So if you look at the SEC table just now, we've got Ole Miss and Texas A&M at the top of that table, and the table doesn't lie, right? These are the teams that are on form just now. It's way too early to say, but we are kind of almost nearly halfway through this season. Could we see Ole Miss and Texas A&M there at the end of the season playing in the SEC championship game in Atlanta?
Yeah, I absolutely think so. I was very high on Texas A&M over the summer, and I kind of compared it to, I know I'm going back to the ex-boyfriend who has proven to me year after year after year that I shouldn't trust that he's going to change. But I said, this is the year that my friends are finally going to say, okay, he's changed. He's different. And I feel a little bit vindicated at this point in the season by that Texas A&M prediction. Obviously, still a lot of game left to play. But that offense is dangerous. If they can clean up some of those self-inflicted wounds, the penalties, you're talking about one of the most penalized teams in the country out there in College Station. If you could even cut that in half, we're talking about a very different start to the season that has already been obviously very good. And to your point about Ole Miss, who would have thought? Like, that was not a team that was necessarily on my radar as far as being an SEC championship contender, just because of the amount that they lost. We look at the defense, and certainly with a new starting quarterback who I had high hopes for, Austin Simmons, because I took a lot of heat in the first couple of weeks of the season. We power rank all of the teams in the conference every single week. And I dropped Ole Miss down pretty low. I had them at 12 or 13, I think, just because they had played 2 games. What was it? Georgia State, I believe they started the year, and then again against Kentucky to open the SEC season. Austin Simmons had thrown 4 just mind-numbing interceptions through those first 2 games. And I thought to myself, man, when they start to see some tough SEC defenses, this is not going to cut it. This is not good. You don't want to see 4 turnovers, which was more than twice what any other quarterback had done through the first 2 games of the season. So I dropped him down. In comes Trinidad Chambliss, and all of a sudden you're sitting here going, what in the world is going on in Oxford? And where did this kid come from? Now, I'm going out there this weekend for their game against Washington State. Very curious after a bye week. Austin Simmons should be getting better in the health category. Where do we go from here now, right? Like Trinidad Chambliss came in because Austin Simmons was injured. What does that look like for the remainder of the season? But with Chambliss behind center, that is a team that has surprised a lot of us outside of Oxford, Mississippi, as far as the skill set, maybe even being better than last year's team was, which is crazy to say. But man, if you can't keep up with that offense in Oxford, you probably don't stand a chance. And we've already seen that 3 SEC wins is hard to debate. So Texas A&M, Ole Miss, I could absolutely see it. And how fun would that be to have some fresh blood? A&M would be in it for the first time ever. I believe Ole Miss as well. So that would be pretty insane.
That would be a lot of fun. That would be.
One team that it wouldn't matter if you had these as the number 1 team in the country, their fans would still say that they're being slept on and underrated. The Missouri Tigers play Alabama this weekend. Not anywhere really near the conversation that we've just had for a lot of people in terms of the rankings for the college football playoff, in terms of the SEC power rankings for a lot of people. Like, is Missouri like the ultimate being slept on team, do you think, going into this game against Alabama?
Yes and no. I went on the SEC network last week and we did, all right, we're 1 month through the season. Here's one thing I know, one thing I think I know, and one thing that I still would like to find out. And the topic for think I know for me was, I think Missouri's for real, but have they necessarily played anyone or had that statement win so far this season? Now, Kansas looks like a good football team. South Carolina comes in, and here's my issue with the South Carolina game. Gamecocks had 14 penalties, turned the football over. Lenoris couldn't do anything seemingly through the air, and they had -7 rushing yards. Yet it was still a game in the final 3-4 minutes, and it was only a 9-point victory. That was a game that on paper, if you told me that South Carolina had committed all of these errors, that I would have told you it would have been a double-digit blowout by Missouri. So again, it's not necessarily fair to say they're not for real based off of that. An SEC win is a win. But if they can do it against Alabama, I will feel much differently than I think I know versus I think we definitely will know then at that point. They just haven't necessarily showed it against someone who we know is going to be at the top of the SEC, which I think we can all agree now. Alabama looks to be a team that is going to be a contender down the stretch in the SEC after going to Athens, beating Georgia, obviously being able to hold off the mighty Vanderbilt Commodores this past weekend. But Missouri is a team I scratch my head about. You know, I think the team that actually is being slept on, that has proven a little bit more than Missouri, is Tennessee. I think people are kind of forgetting about Tennessee and what they have done from an offensive standpoint. I think people are also forgetting that they are without 2-3 defensive starters on the defensive side of the football. And when they get Jermod McCoy back, that is going to be a much different defense just on him alone. So that to me is the team. If I had to choose someone being slept on, it would be Tennessee at this point.
It's certainly going to be interesting. One team where the pressure is really mounting is Texas, and they've got a big game coming up. Now, it's hard to tell. I'd be surprised if Mateer makes it back in time for the Red River game, but let's say that he does make it back. Things are not going well in Austin at all. There's a lot of pressure on Arch Manning. Alyssa, you're geographically much closer, but I suspect a lot closer to the program than we are. Does the sky fall in if Texas fall to a third defeat and they're their closest rivals?
I think it does. And I think it's starting to right now. You were not supposed to go to Florida and lose to this Gators team that was on life support, right? Everybody's back on the what are we going to do with Billy Napier train. And then this quarterback who's in the Warby Parker commercials between every commercial break, Arch Manning goes out and doesn't do much for you, right? On the other side, DJ Lagway looks closer to the DJ Lagway that we thought we were going to get. I think we sat here and we said, okay, well, while Arch comes along, this Texas defense is elite. I'm not sure that they're elite either. I think it's a good defense, but I certainly wouldn't put them up against some of the others that we've seen so far in the SEC. So is the sky falling? It's starting to. It certainly will if you lose to Oklahoma in the Red River. Certainly if it's against a backup quarterback in Michael Hawkins Jr. Because to your point, George, I mean, the timeline for Mateer coming back from that surgery was a month, and it hasn't been a month. Now, we've seen crazier things happen. I wouldn't be overly shocked if John Mateer ran out there in Dallas and played in that football game, but it does not stack up to the timeline. So it's been a bizarre year in Texas. I think a lot of people owe Quinn Ewers an apology. I also think that it is a reminder that you cannot lose 3 offensive linemen to the NFL and expect to pick up right where you left off. The development and depth that Texas had in the trenches last year was a big reason why they were successful in year 1 in the SEC. And we just haven't necessarily seen Arch get the type of protection that we saw the quarterback, whoever it was last year, get throughout the 24 season. So there's a lot to clean up for Steve Sarkisian and the Texas Longhorns. But a win could put the sky back up, right?
Well, exactly right. I mean, that could change things around. And I think we kind of, I don't think we forget, but this is a much improved Oklahoma defense as well this season, right? So they're now starting to show their teeth in that respect. So whatever happens, this is going to be an uncomfortable afternoon for Arch, right? It's not going to be, but hey, we'll see how it goes.
It's going to be fun. I mean, when you sack Jackson Arnold, what was it, 9 times, 10 times? I don't even remember where the stat sheet ended up. I think 1 got taken away. I'm going to say it was 10. That should tell you it could be a very uncomfortable day for Arch Manning if they cannot figure something out over the next 6 days, for sure.
Speaking of uncomfortable days, our favorite snake oil salesman, Hugh Freeze, takes on the Georgia Bulldogs this weekend with the pressure. George talked about pressure at Texas. There's legitimate pressure now, right, at Auburn for Hugh Freeze to pull something out of the bag, because they just haven't looked good in the departments he's supposed to have them looking good in, right? How much is the pressure on Hugh Freeze? How hot is his seat? Are we talking about a guy who could be out of a job with a loss to Georgia?
You're always under the microscope and you're always in a pressure cooker when you're the head coach at Auburn, right? Hugh Freeze knew that when you take that job. I do a show every week on the SEC Network with Gene Chizik, who would tell you that every single week, no matter what happens, Auburn fans expect excellence. They have not gotten it so far this season. And I think we were all cautiously optimistic going from last year to this year. The defensive side of the football was a salty group last year. They were young. We knew that Keldrick Falk was going to be one of the best defensive linemen in all the SEC. He's one of the best pass rushers in the country. That defense has gotten better, but the glaring area of this team remains the question mark at the quarterback position. Now, it's not all on Jackson Arnold. When your offensive line is allowing you to get sacked 9 times, that is an issue. Now, there's also an issue of Jackson Arnold holding onto the football a little bit too much and not protecting it in the way that he needs to. But I think the bigger picture question is, why hasn't Hugh Freeze been able to hit on the quarterback at this point? You went and got Jackson Arnold out of the portal after dealing with Peyton Thorne the last 2 years, and that didn't necessarily go the way you wanted it to for both parties. So you sit here and you go, okay, Jackson Arnold was a highly touted guy, didn't work out at Oklahoma. Hugh Freeze is this offensive mind, quarterback guru. It's going to work. And it just simply hasn't. They've got a great backup by the name of Deuce Knight, who they were able to recruit away from some other SEC programs. And I've had Auburn fans ask me, is it Deuce time? And it might be. It'll not be an easy task this weekend welcoming Georgia to the Plains. You don't necessarily want to ruin a young quarterback by throwing him out there in the middle of SEC play before he's ready. But I haven't seen much that tells me that this offense is going to get better overnight. And again, I don't want to put it all on Hugh Freeze, because watching Auburn play and going back and watching the film, I don't necessarily think that it's all play calling. We can always diagnose and dissect play calling, but I'm watching Jackson Arnold step back and have 2-3 receivers open and he just doesn't see them. I'm watching opportunities for big explosive plays and they just can't execute, or he doesn't have enough time to step up into the pocket and make the throw. So, it's a tough situation to be in. The coaches aren't out there playing. Obviously, they're only calling the plays and hoping that these guys can go out and execute that. But the execution ultimately does fall on the coaches, and it hasn't been there yet for Auburn. So it's understandable that Auburn fans are very frustrated at this point in the season.
The fans and the boosters will be very, very frustrated. Yeah. We say this time and time again, Alyssa, that we have a great guest on. We just run out of time, and we've run out of time. But two really quick things before you go. The flip side of Texas losing was Florida winning. How pleased were you to see Billy Napier get a real proper win on Saturday?
Well, you mentioned I took my honeymoon this past summer. In March, got married to my husband, who is a Florida Gator alum. So I was happy for a lot of reasons, mostly because he had a reason to smile on Saturday watching his team finally get on the other side of one of these games. It was bittersweet, honestly. I loved seeing it. But what we saw from Florida, specifically Florida's offense, had me going, where has this been all year long? And why couldn't you start the year doing this? Why haven't you been handing the football off to Jaden Ball more in some of these big matchups? And why did you wait until October to do so? So that's why I say it's bittersweet. Obviously, it's more on the sweet side for Florida to be able to be victorious and hopefully spin this thing in the right direction for Gator fans who certainly deserve it after what they've dealt with over the past couple of years. But it was a head scratcher for me. And I'm texting Chris Doring, Florida alum. I'm, sitting on the couch with my husband watching this. And we're going, okay, this is what Florida could have been, going back to USF, going back to Miami. Why didn't we see this? Better late than never, I guess, but it's just a bizarre situation knowing that you had that. Dallas Wilson, obviously being back, was a huge, huge element for Florida's offense, but you've got one of the best running backs in the country in Jaden Ball. He should be touching the football as much as possible, and he finally did that against Texas.
Yeah, as you say, it is very frustrating. Right, last thing before you go, you mentioned your grand European vacation. Where was your favourite place? Because you were everywhere, right?
We were everywhere.
Every time I opened Instagram, there was another not just another photograph, another country. So
yeah.
Where was your favourite place?
I will say I had a lot of people who said, "Did you move? Did you actually move to Europe?" And I said, "I'm trying to work on it. Actually, I'm seeing if I can work my SEC network job while I'm over here." I think the best place, at least for me, was when we were in Nice. We went to Nice and all around the south of France. We were only there for about 3.5 days, which was not long enough. We would love to go back and spend more time there. But we went out to Monaco. We took a boat excursion and looked at all the houses from the water there in the Nice area. And it was just unbelievably beautiful. It makes sense why so many people go there for their European vacation. But Ireland was definitely a close second. Ireland was where we ended our trip in Dublin, and it was awesome. We had an absolute blast. It was so great.
Great. Well, thank you for taking the time out. We've kept you longer than we said we would, but we do appreciate your time. For those people who want to follow you and watch what you're doing, where can they find you, Alyssa?
So usually if you turn on the TV, I'll be on the SEC network at some point in the next few hours. Whenever you turn it on, at some point you'll see me on there. Of course, on X, Twitter, at Alyssa Lang, and then on Instagram as well, is where I post most of my work and interact with fans for the most part.
Awesome. Thank you. That's all from us. Thanks to Alyssa and Ole for their brilliant insight. And thanks to you for listening and watching and supporting us. Stay safe and well, and catch you all next time.